Good evening. Welcome to This Week in Turkey. Prime Minister Binali Yıldırım visited Washington, D.C. this week to hold talks with the U.S. Vice President Mike Pence.
Turkish Prime Minister Binali Yıldırım and U.S. Vice President Mike Pence met on Thursday in the White House amid an ongoing crisis between the two countries. Topics on the agenda included the recent visa crisis, Islamic State and YPG terror groups in Syria and Iraq, the extradition of Fethullah Gülen, arrested U.S. citizens and Turkish staff members at U.S. consulates in Turkey, and the fate of Reza Zarrab, a Turkish-Iranian businessman arrested in the U.S., as well as economic and military relations. The meeting lasted 1 hour and 20 minutes. We have decided to maintain dialogue. We agreed to try to resolve problems with instant touches via telephone. I observed that the Vice President has a positive look toward Turkey, Binali Yıldırım told reporters after the meeting. We demanded that at least a step to restrict Gülen's movements and actions be taken as a start. Upon our Gülen remarks, he brought up the arrests of consulate employees and Pastor Brunson, Yıldırım added. American pastor Andrew Brunson was arrested in Izmir on charges linked to Gülen movement. We also received promise from Pence to keep better track of weapons provided to the YPG in Syria. Pence said US understands Turkey's sensitivity about the YPG. Their partnership would only be short-term. We also discussed the arrests of Reza Zarrab and Mehmet Hakan Atilla. Our delegation reiterated that these arrests are unlawful, as the people who prepared the documents did it through illegal means and are now being tried in Turkey, Prime Minister Yıldırım said. US prosecutors charged the former Turkish Economy Minister Zafer Çağlayan, former General Manager of state-owned Halkbank Süleyman Aslan, and Turkish-Iranian gold trader Reza Zarrab with conspiring to evade US sanctions against Iran. Zarrab and the Halkbank Deputy General Manager Mehmet Hakan Atilla were arrested in the US and are scheduled to stand trial in November. Yıldırım also added that the current visa issue between two countries was returning to normal. Furthermore, the White House said Pence and Yıldırım hope to usher in a new chapter in US-Turkish relations. The leaders expressed hope that their meeting would help to usher in a new chapter in US-Turkey relations and agreed on the need for constructive dialogue as friends and allies on bilateral challenges, the White House said in a statement after the meeting. The Vice President expressed deep concern over the arrests of American citizens, Mission Turkey local staff, journalists and members of civil society under the state of emergency and urged transparency and due process in the resolution of their cases, was also said in the statement.
Joining us from Washington, D.C. tonight to talk about Prime Minister Binali Yıldırım's visit to the U.S. is Merve Tahiroğlu, who is a research associate at the Foundation for Defense of Democracy. Good evening, Ms. Tahiroğlu.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
So, first and foremost, how do you evaluate the current state of the visa crisis between the U.S. and Turkey? Some steps have been taken, as you know, in the past week to ease the process, but how is it going so far, really?
So I think it's important to contextualize the visa crisis a little bit here, because they have said, the American side has said recently, I think just this week, that they will be easing some of the restrictions and start reprocessing some of the visa applications. But I think we have to understand why the crisis erupted to begin with, right? And I think to consider really what happened here, I know the Turkish side has pinned the blame a lot on the American ambassador to Turkey, to Ambassador Bass, as acting unilaterally for this decision. But we have to understand some of the U.S. frustrations with the Turkish government that have been brewing over the last year, 2 years, particularly that pertain to rule of law in Turkey. The Americans have been quite disconcerted, I think, about the American citizens inside Turkey who have been getting arrested, which in a way that seems to be showing rule of law and getting arrested arbitrarily, particularly since the the coup attempt in Turkey in July 15, 2016. And what we have is we have an American pastor who has been in jail now for over a year, still hasn't had a trial. And we have a NASA scientist, a physicist, who's also a Turkish-American citizen. But when the crisis erupted, that these two citizens had already been detained and jailed in Turkey. But we also had some Turkish employees of American diplomatic missions inside Turkey also get arrested. So when the visa crisis erupted eventually, it was a response seemingly to the arrest of Metin Topuz, I believe his name, the second consular employee, Turkish employee of the Americans in Turkey. But it reflected a much deeper anxiety about the safety of U.S. citizens and allies and employees inside Turkey, the coup, especially in light of the rising anti-Americanism and anti-Westernism inside Turkey. And also, I think we have to understand that exacerbating this concern over the arrest has been the emergence, I think, increasingly what we can describe as a hostage diplomacy of the Turkish government, whereby some European states, including Germany and France, and now we are hearing the same thing from some American analysts and officials joining in on this debate, who view the Turkish government's actions by jailing and detaining Western citizens inside Turkey. They see it perhaps as a way of Ankara to use these detainees as bargaining chips for political gain in the diplomatic relationship Ankara pursues with the government, including the American government. So I think all of these put together explain the visa crisis a little bit, and I think show that it was indeed a limited reaction, in fact, to this very important concern. So I think that the easing of restrictions this week are good news for both sides, but we also can't expect too much to come out of it right now because the concerns continue.
So, as you've just briefly described, there's a current visa crisis going on between the two countries at the moment, and Prime Minister Yıldırım's visit to Washington, D.C. and his meeting with Vice President Pence took place in the shadow of this ongoing crisis. Although there were two other main points in Yıldırım's agenda, namely the extradition of Fethullah Gülen and the U.S. support for PYD and YPG, which are seen by Turkey as terrorist organizations. But the statements made after the 1 hour, 20-minute long meeting between the two politicians suggest that neither Gülen's extradition nor Turkey's discontent with the U.S. support for the YPG were adequately addressed during the meeting. So how successful or productive do you think this meeting was from the perspective of Prime Minister Yıldırım?
I think to answer that question, we have to understand what Turkey sought to achieve with this trip. I see this trip as primarily a way to contain the political fallout from the visa crisis, to show that dialogue continues between the two countries, despite the fact that this very important, and some people have called it the most important crisis in bilateral relations in decades. So I think this was primarily to contain fallout from that. But I also think it had to do with some of the recent news that has been emerging from the trial of Reza Zarrab, which is scheduled to begin in 2 weeks. So I have to remember that too. So in that sense, they did have the meeting, and it did show that the commerce dialogue continues between the two countries. But really think about the trip, the way it unfolded, it wasn't that much of a success. First, the meeting between Vice President Pence and Prime Minister Yıldırım was delayed by 2 days, and that's not a good sign. And also, President Trump wasn't here, even he was in his foreign policy team with him in Asia. So there wasn't much attention given to this to begin with. But also, if we look at the statements that came out after the meeting from the Turkish side, we can see a discrepancy Whereas the Turkish side said that the meeting went quite productive. Vice President Pence's remarks very much focused on emphasizing the continued American concerns, deep concerns about the safety of American citizens in Turkey and the state of Turkey's rule of law. So I think if we look at that discrepancy and the way the trip so far unfolded, at least the sea leg of it, now the Prime Minister is continuing the trip in New York. But if we look at the way it unfolded inside DC, wasn't that much of a productive meeting at the end of the day. So we're seeing it as a bit of a media stunt to assuage the concerns of Turkish media about the visa crisis and the diplomatic relation, and also the markets.
Mm-hmm. And after his meeting with Pence, Yıldırım has said that in addition to Gülen and the YPG, the two main points in their agenda, they also discussed the arrests of Turkish-Iranian businessman and gold trader Reza Zarrab and former Halkbank executive Mehmet Hakan Atilla. And what's being discussed behind the scenes is that Yıldırım's visit to the US, in fact, had much to do with this Zarrab Atilla case. So what's Turkey hoping to get in terms of the Zarrab Atilla case? What's Turkey trying to get out of Yıldırım's visit on this, in relation to this case? And how attainable or realistic is this goal?
So I think this case is really important. I think it's one of the primary reasons, along with the visa crisis and the arrests of American citizens in Turkey. I think it's one of the primary reasons for the trip, especially because this case has been at the heart of Turkish-American relations for now since Zarrab's arrest in the United States in March 2016. So what we have been seeing since then, in either American officials visit to Turkey and Turkish officials visit here, that this case has been brought by the Turkish side multiple times, even if we haven't heard about them immediately after these meetings. We have, in retrospect, heard that the Zarrab case has more, in fact, a big part of all those meetings. So clearly the Turkish side cares about this, and I think what has happened over the last 2 weeks, especially based on American reports, Times coverage of the case so far, which is starting in 2 weeks. But what we have been hearing for the last 2 weeks is that Zarrab may now be pleading guilty, which would mean it does end up being that indeed it would mean that he would cooperate with the prosecutors, with the investigation, and perhaps divulge some information that we didn't previously know that might help the investigation further into Turkish and Iranian relationship in evading international sanctions and especially U.S. sanctions against Iran's nuclear program. I think as we've been hearing about this potential cooperation between Zarrab and the prosecutors and pleading guilty, the Turkish side is increasingly alarmed by what might come out of it. And it's also important to remember that once there is a conviction for this case, Turkish banks could get fined if they are found guilty in fact, processing these transactions that have helped evade Iranian sanctions, particularly processing transactions that involved U.S. dollars. And I think that this is a big concern for Turkey's economy, and this is a big concern for Ankara, and especially Halkbank, but also other Turkish banks. So I think that the Prime Minister's visit addressed the Turkish concerns about what is at stake here with the trial, and we can't really know what is going to be the outcome until the trial ends, because it is primarily a legal matter. We do see all these efforts. This fits in the general Turkish pattern of raising this issue, this trial, diplomatic channels to dismiss the trial or to at least contain the political and financial fallout that we might be seeing just a couple of weeks.
My final question to you will be on a fresh new report that was published by the Wall Street Journal today. According to this report, former US National Security Advisor Michael Flynn and his son met with Turkey's Foreign Minister Merve Tahiroğlu and Energy Minister Berat Albayrak last December to discuss a secret plan to kidnap Gülen and to remove him from the United States in exchange for a large sum of money. Now that this plan has been included in the probe that's currently being investigated by Robert Mueller, how likely is it that the probe may be expanded to involve the Turkish ministers that are in question here, namely Foreign Minister Çavuşoğlu and Energy Minister Albayrak?
Right. So this is a very sensitive issue, and the Wall Street Journal article today, I think, startled a lot of us watching Turkish-American relations, and particularly the whole extradition case. So I think it's important to emphasize what we do know. And I don't want to make any speculation, especially about the potential of getting Turkish officials involved in this investigation. I mean, this investigation is primarily focused on the Russian meddling, potential Russian meddling of the American election last year, and also some of the campaign advisors, officials, and their relationships to Russia. We do see in the Wall Street Journal, and the journal had reported previously, but we now know is that 2 meetings took place that involved Turkish officials and Mike Flynn. One before the elections in September, and then one after the election in December, and both of them, according to the reports, involved discussions of potentially extraditing Gülen in an extra legal way by simply putting him on a plane and bringing him into Turkey. This is very disconcerting should be disconcerting for Turkey, because regardless of whether these officials will be included in the investigation or not, I mean, first of all, it goes on to show that Turkey is, in fact, it fits a pattern of Turkish officials' behavior and this government's behavior, breaching rule of law, not only in Turkey, but also in their relationships with foreign counterparts. This is, I think, if we look at it together with the whole hostage diplomacy situation that I mentioned earlier, concerns over that and hostage diplomacy, also Turkish law efforts here that have to do with the Zarat case, but also with the extradition, also with the Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's presidential security guards coming here, both in front of Brookings and the Sheridan Circle, causing crises, really, and acting in complete impunity. I think all of these have show a pattern of Turkish behavior, undermine rule of law, not just inside Turkey, but also in dealings with foreign counterparts. I think also what this investigation and this particular news might do for Turkey, I think it'll have a very negative effect on bilateral relations, partly because there is also an increasingly popular view in the United States and in the West in general that this investigation focuses on Russia primarily because Russia is a geopolitical adversary of the United States. But Turkey is a NATO ally. It is not an adversary. It is at least nominally supposed to be an ally of the transatlantic community. So the fact that Turkish officials dealings with American officials have been like this, have focused on such efforts, and especially those at some point, I think the offer included millions of dollars in payment to Mr. Flynn and his son to carry this plan. I mean, it's not only embarrassing; it helps put Turkey on the same level with Russia when we look at bilateral relations. There's this increasing view that Turkey is only a nominal ally of the West and is in fact acting as a Russian Trojan horse, so to speak, inside NATO, and especially in Turkey's relationship with the EU. These views go back to actually 2014, the whole discussion of Turkish-Russian pipeline project that was supposed to deliver natural gas to Europe, but this view has increased recently with Turkey's participation in Astana talks on Syria with Russia and Iran. Also, most recently with the discussions around the purchase of S-400s, the missile system that is incompatible with NATO, by a NATO ally from Russia. These have all strengthened the views in this part of the Atlantic that Turkey may in fact be helping Russia more than just helping its NATO allies. And regardless of what happens with this particular investigation in the United States, I think certainly these news that are coming from it, and if we hear about it more as the investigation proceeds, it'll strengthen the view that Turkey is in fact more connected to these destabilizing actions of Russia against the West than it is a Western ally. And I think that's it will have bad implications for Turkey in the long term, not least on its democracy and rule of law, which are already waning.
Ms. Tahiroğlu, thank you very much for joining us tonight and for your comments.
Thank you.
We'll continue with our next news video, which is an update on the visa crisis between Turkey and the US.
The Turkish embassy in Washington announced on Thursday that Turkey's missions in the US have started processing the visa applications of US citizens on a limited basis. Earlier in the week, the United States Embassy in Turkey had also announced that it will resume processing non-immigrant visas for Turkish nationals on a limited basis. In a written statement, the US Embassy in Ankara announced that we believe the security posture has improved sufficiently to allow for the resumption of limited visa services in Turkey. According to media reports, a reduced number of interviews will be scheduled to process the applications. The Turkey-US visa crisis was triggered last month after the arrest of Metin Topuz, who is a local employee at the US consulate in Istanbul. In response, the US Embassy in Ankara announced the suspension of non-immigrant visa services to Turkish citizens, prompting a tit-for-tat response from Ankara. The launch of visa services between the US and Turkey can be considered as a positive development, Prime Minister Binali Yıldırım told the reporters before his visit to Washington. According to Hürriyet Daily, the US sources claim that the decision to resume visa services came after Turkey's assurance that no additional local employees of US mission would be investigated, detained, or arrested for performing their official duties.
The Paradise Papers leak has revealed that 8 offshore companies in Malta are affiliated with Prime Minister Binali Yıldırım and his relatives.
On November 5th, the Süddeutsche Zeitung and the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists revealed a series of documents called the Paradise Papers, which show the scale of the offshore empire in the world. The Paradise Papers demonstrated that there are 8 offshore companies affiliated with Prime Minister Binali Yıldırım's sons, uncles, and nephews. Binali Yıldırım's sons, Erkam and Bülent Yıldırım, own a total of 5 companies based in tax haven Malta and founded between 2004 and 2007. The companies are named the Black Eagle Marine Company Limited, Hawke Bay Marine Company Limited, and South Seas Shipping Company. All of these are involved in the buying and the selling of sea vessels and providing credit to third parties. Binali Yıldırım finally reacted to these accusations on November 7th and demanded a probe into the Paradise Papers statements. "My sons are doing business all over the world. Nothing is hidden," said Yıldırım, adding that the accusations are attempts to unjustly defame him. But he faced the opposition party's criticism. Why are you establishing companies in Malta? Why in a tax haven? You are telling citizens to pay taxes, but you are taking your earnings elsewhere, CHP leader said. The AKP presidential palace power, which calls on others to invest in our country, is making its own investments in Malta in tax havens. They present themselves as patriots to the public, but we see that their patriotism is for Malta. Their love of the flag is love for the flag of Malta, Serpil Kelmabey, HDP co-leader said. The Paradise Papers represent 13.4 million offshore investment documents that involves many well-known companies and individuals, from the Queen of England to Facebook.
Prominent economist Atilla Yeşilada commented on the performance of the Turkish Lira for Medyascope this week.
Since the beginning of the month of September, Turkish Lira has suddenly become the weakest emerging market's currency measured against the dollar. There are several reasons for that. Obviously, the slight appreciation of the American dollar and the rise in the American long yields have contributed to that. Turkey is considered one of the most fragile countries in respect to the tightening of the global financial conditions, and these are being tightened. For instance, now the markets take Fed's promise of raising interest rates 3 times in 2018 more seriously, which is very harmful to Turkey, which is a very foreign credit dependent country. So there's a discounting of future events in the Turkish exchange rate. We must also remember that Turkish government bond yields have risen substantially, which is also discounting the factor that I mentioned. Also, political risk, which has been ignored for a very long time by global fund managers, suddenly emerged in the context of at least 3, possibly 4 countries. These countries are Mexico, because of NAFTA, South African Republic, obviously, because of Zuma situation and the transition to a new presidency in the ruling party, and in Turkey because of difficulties with Germany and the United States. I want to continue on that. These difficulties or tensions with the United States and Germany focus on the banking system, which is obviously critical for procuring the foreign credit on which Turkey thrives. It is obvious and confirmed that Berlin has put pressure on European development banks and on German commercial banks to reduce exposure to Turkey. Germany is one of the biggest lenders to Turkey. So obviously fund managers have become afraid. Become expensive and perhaps difficult to reach for Turkish banks. In case of the United States, there is a lawsuit in New York Southern District Federal Court against 2 gentlemen called Mr. Reza Zarrab and Mr. Hakan Atilla, who are accused of violating Iranian sanctions. And certain Turkish banks are also implicated as conspirators or co-conspirators. The first session of this trial will get underway on 27th of November. There are rumors flying around that the American Treasury Department is investigating other banks vis-a-vis the same charges. And obviously, if these rumors are confirmed or turn out to be true, certain Turkish banks may be penalized very large sums. We are talking about billions. All of these news gelled together, and I think, at least in the minds of some fund managers, created the impression that the Turkish banking system may be forced to reduce foreign borrowing in 2018. Let me finish with an overall picture of Turkey's foreign financing structure. Within the next 12 months, Turkey will have to roll over roughly $170 billion of maturing foreign debt, plus find financing for roughly $40 billion worth of current account deficits. And that's a very onerous sum at a time when LIBOR and American interest rates and bond yields are set to rise. On top of that, if you add the perception or the forecast that that Turkish banks either would not be able to borrow as much as they would like to, or that because of the risks I've discussed, they will have to pay higher premiums. Obviously, you get a very high risk premium for the currency, which is currently being discounted. In conclusion, unless Ankara takes measures to raise the interest rates, which would increase carry, or these difficulties with Germany and the United States go away miraculously, the upside for Turkish Lira is very limited.
The Ministry of Education has announced significant changes in the national education system.
A central high school entrance exam will only be held at specific schools, Education Minister İsmet Yılmaz has said, announcing that Turkey's new education system will be based upon the principle of students enrolling at the nearest school available. With this new system, students will be admitted to the nearest school to where they live. That is the basic point, Yılmaz told state-run Anadolu Agency on November 5th. Revealing details of the new system called System of Educational District and Regional Enrollment, Yılmaz said there will be a new examination only for project schools, the list of which will be announced soon. It will be an optional exam. We are currently preparing these questions. All the examinations will be held in the province where the student lives. It will be a central exam that is executed locally. All the questions will be prepared by the ministry, Yılmaz said. We will hold this exam in the first weekend of June, he said, adding that the exam will be a multiple-choice test system. It will feature 60 questions and students will have 90 minutes to answer them, Yılmaz stated.
Leading Silicon Valley entrepreneur Elon Musk met with President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan in Ankara this week.
President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan held a meeting with leading Silicon Valley technology and research entrepreneur Elon Musk on Wednesday, a few days after the launch of a joint venture to produce the country's first domestically made car. Musk, founder of world-leading technology companies SpaceX, Tesla, Neuralink and SolarCity, met with Erdoğan at the presidential palace in Ankara to discuss cooperation between his companies and Turkish firms, including the launch of Turkish satellites in 2020 and 2021. Presidential spokesman İbrahim Kalın told state-run Anadolu Agency that the two also talked about electric cars and sustainable energy. It came days after a consortium of 5 Turkish businesses, Anadolu Group, BMC, Kıraça Holding, Turkcell and Zorlu Holding, launched a joint venture to design and produce a Turkish-made car. The joint venture was launched under Erdoğan's urging. During his visit in Ankara, Musk also visited the founder of the Turkish Republic, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk's mausoleum. Musk also shared on Twitter his photo at the mausoleum and a quote of Atatürk. In his tweet, Musk paid tribute to Atatürk, referring to the Turkish War of Independence. I placed the flowers, 3 broken ribs, a pierced lung, and still he fought for peace at, Musk said.
Reporters Without Borders and TV 5 Monde awarded Mediascope their 2017 Press Freedom Prize.
Reporters Without Borders and TV 5 Monde awarded their 2017 Press Freedom Prize to Mediascope TV in the media outlet category. Our editor-in-chief Ruşen Çakır was present at the award ceremony, which was held in Strasbourg, France, to receive the prize and to give a speech about Mediascope TV and freedom of press in Turkey. You know very well the current situation in Turkey. You also know that journalism in Turkey is becoming more difficult every day. Our objective is, first of all, to survive as journalists, whatever the conditions may be, and do it well. We are trying to do journalism while combining the possibilities provided by new technologies and social media with universal principles and the values of journalism. The prize of the RSF demonstrates that our efforts are not in vain, and this has made us very happy. For this reason, I would like to thank you on behalf of my colleagues who brought Medyascope into existence, Çakır said.
The 36th International Istanbul Book Fair ends this Sunday.
The 36th International Istanbul Book Fair is taking place at TÜYAP Fair Convention and Congress Center in Istanbul and will end on Sunday. Thousands of Istanbulites and residents from other cities have visited the 36th International Istanbul Book Fair, which opened on November 4th in the Büyükçekmece district. The fair is organized by TÜYAP Fairs in partnership with the Turkish Publishers Association. More than 800 Turkish and foreign publishers and non-governmental organizations are taking part in this year's fair, which hosts more than 300 events including workshops for children, lectures by authors, and autograph sessions. This year, Turkish novelist Ayla Kutlu received the fair's Writer of Honor Award.
The 21st Istanbul Theatre Festival is set to begin next week.
The 21st edition of the Istanbul Theatre Festival will take place between 13th and the 26th of November. The festival will once again offer theatre goers an extensive program featuring a range of plays, dance shows and performances from Turkey and abroad, as well as side events. Starting with 2017, the Istanbul Theatre Festival returns to an annual cycle after 15 years of being held biennially. The festival is familiar with raising its curtains once a year, as it was the case from its initiation by İKSV in 1989 until 2002. The 21st Istanbul Theatre Festival will present a total of 55 performances by 19 theatre and dance ensembles, 6 from abroad and 13 from Turkey, in 18 different venues. The festival program also features a number of events, including panels, film screenings, masterclasses, and workshops with the participation of international guests and experts. The festival hosts 6 theatre and dance ensembles from abroad. The final chapter of the trilogy, which started with Alarm and continued with Amor, staged by Atis Theatre, founded and directed by Theodoros Terzapoulos. The French choreographer Angeline Prelojak, who will receive the honorary award this year, will also meet the audience with his latest work, La Fresque. The festival program also includes the Italian immersive theatre ensemble TPO's Farfel, which invites audiences of all ages to see the world through the eyes of the butterflies. Portuguese director Pedro Penip's Before, a performance that travels back in time, and Seus, an emotionally charged play by Lebanese-Canadian playwright and director Wajdi Mouawad about his search for himself.
Now let's have a look at what's on in Istanbul next week.
Turkish indie group The Away Days is taking the stage at Salon tonight, once again after the debut show for their most recent album Dreamed at Dawn. Since its formation in 2012, the group made a substantial name for itself in their native Turkey. The Akbank Jazz Festival continues. Simon Green, aka Bonobo, will be on the stage this Saturday at Volkswagen Arena. With his compilation album, Black Sands, and its re-edits of tracks by artists ranging from Belevins to Airheads and the singer Sijerdin, he earned worldwide attention. For the promotion of his 5th album, The North Borders, he went on a huge world tour, which covered 175 shows, including a sellout at the Sydney Opera House. But during this time, he lost a close member of the family, which made him meditate on identity, home, belonging, migration people and what they carry along with them. Then, Bonobo prolonged his 8-month-long tour into 3 years of migration in the heart of wilderness. So, came out his latest album Migration, an existential study of people and places, exploring humans' emotional dynamics.
That's all from This Week in Turkey. Thanks for tuning in and hope to see you again next Friday at 9 p.m. Goodbye.